We'll keep an eye on those bills over the next few weeks, but let's bring in this week's panel now. Josh Solomon is from the Times-Union. Zach Williams is from the New York Post. Thank you both for being here. I appreciate it.
Of course.
So let's circle back on guns now. Josh, I want to start with you. So we have 2 weeks of the legislative session left. Lawmakers are considering what they're going to do in terms of guns. We saw some actions from Governor Hochul earlier this week that we've already talked about on the show, so we can skip that. But in terms of the legislature, what's on the table in the next few weeks? We've talked about a few minutes ago the red flag law with Brian Kavanaugh. Don't really know the specifics of that, but what are they looking at?
Well, first off, on red flag law, they are thinking about widening it potentially to whomever they want to be an automatic reporter. And so that could be teachers, behavioral experts, and law enforcement, or just law enforcement. But as we know, for now, it's just law enforcement that the governor controls, state police.
Right.
And, other types of versions of background checks, figuring out what types of guns that they can ban that live in what the governor calls a gray area.
Yeah.
And so they're going to try to see how can we put further Band-Aids on it. But, obviously you should always note that they look toward Congress and saying that's the hole, and we're just putting Band-Aids on the situation.
Right. What we did have here is the shooter bought the gun legally in New York, went to Pennsylvania to get the higher capacity magazine that is legal in New York. So New York can't exactly legislate that. Is there anything that they can do? Anything that they're talking about in terms of that? I know that the governor's talking about this any other weapon thing, where there are some guns that look military style that are apparently legal in New York, but I don't really know how they get around that in terms of legislation. And it's okay if you guys don't either. I have no idea.
I think the big issue is New York already has some of the strictest gun laws in the whole country, but the governor wants to project that she's doing something. It's just, the scale of this tragedy, it's hard to grapple with. And I think they're really trying to find a lot of different ways to respond. And while she's tried to avoid the appearance of politicizing this, massacre, I think it is worth mentioning that this whole situation kind of allows her to kind of flip the script on the whole anti-crime messaging that we've seen from her political opponents in recent months. She's running in the Democratic primary. She's gotten hit on bail and bail like she hasn't done enough. And, this new anti-gun package that she unveiled, as well as what's going on, in Buffalo, really gives her a chance to come out strong as the anti-crime governor in ways that would have just been kind of inconceivable just a week ago.
Speaking of politics, Zach, I want to ask you, because you really have your finger on the pulse of New York State politics. Is there any political obstacle to passing gun laws before the end of session? It seems right now that lawmakers are very interested in doing something, but as you and I both know, you have issues like, for example, microstamping of bullets, which matches a serial number to a firearm. That is an idea that's been around since the SAFE Act, since before the SAFE Act in 2012. Is there the political will to get that done?
We've seen before that there is political will, particularly after these tragedies. That's what happened in New York nearly a decade ago in the wake of the Newtown shooting in Connecticut. And that's how the SAFE Act got passed and why New York has as strict of gun laws as it does. Something that really struck me on the red flag issue specifically was a little chat I had with Rob Astorino, the former Westchester executive who's now running for the GOP nomination for governor. He's got a pretty hard line on Second Amendment rights. But he expressed support, actually, for increasing mandatory reporting in some circumstances. Now, of course, being a Republican, he wants to balance that with Second Amendment rights. But I think it was notable that, at this time of big polarization, that we at least see a little bit of consensus on some things that can be done to prevent future tragedies.
It's an interesting position for Republicans to be in, I think, because you have the red flag gun law. But in this case, moving forward, state police would be mandatory reporters and possibly local law enforcement if the legislature decides to do that. So then, as a Republican, you have to then balance between, are we going to put our trust in law enforcement to do this? Or am I against this measure that essentially removes someone's guns when they are a harm to themselves or others?
Well, it's not a good week for Representative Lee Zeldin, the putative frontrunner for the Republican nomination. Yeah. A video came out just weeks before this tragedy. I'm sure he might have said things differently had he known what would happen, but he basically called for the repeal of the red flag law, the repeal of the SAFE Act, and for New York to even enact a stand your ground statute. Now, we might recall that that was at the heart of the Trayvon Martin tragedy down in Florida years ago.
Yeah. I
Not a
haven't
good
thought
look.
about that in a while. Oh my goodness. So let's move on from that to redistricting. So this is all going to change in a matter of hours. So grain of salt to our audience. Unfortunately, we tape on Friday mornings. The new maps are going to come out sometime today. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to change all that much. So the context is still there. Josh, I want to turn to you on this. So redistricting, as our audience knows, is drawing new lines for Congress, State Senate, and Assembly. Today, we're supposed to get some new lines for State Senate and Congress, and we got preliminary lines earlier this week, and there's just a mess of incumbents being put in the same district. How do you think this affects the political cycle this year?
It creates chaos. That's the simplest way to put it. I think all the political reporters on Monday and all the politicians on Monday were, feeling like the world was spinning because lines that had been long established, lines, for example, in Manhattan with Congressman Nadler and Maloney, they have long been separated by Central Park, and then there was just a Jewish district on the Upper West Side and Upper East Side, which Jewish communities have fought since then, and there's been thousands of letters to the state court saying, you screwed up, you need to change this, we need to move forward, and ultimately we're going to see a lot of incumbents, a lot of Democrats fighting against each other, figuring out what to do, unless later today we have more chaos that says, actually, we messed up and we're going to change the path. But ultimately, the reason this was done was because the map drawer, the special expert, the special master said, we're going to favor competitive districts that are compact instead of looking at communities of interest, instead of looking at pre-existing political lines. We're just going to make every district as competitive as possible.
Go ahead, Zach.
It seems like the special master really prioritized compactness of the districts over the so-called communities of interest that are protected under the Voting Rights Act passed in the 60s. Something I just would like to add is, with new opportunities come more politicians looking for opportunities.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of legislators eyeing, congressional runs now. And that could get really interesting because, Democrats have been pretty successful at kind of finding candidates that can win in suburban areas that have historically been Republican. But now some of those same people might run for Congress, and that might create some opportunities for the Republicans to claw back their position in the state Senate, where right now they're a super minority.
And we also have this interesting, former New York City Controller Scott Stringer is apparently maybe running for state Senate. So everybody's playing this game of like fun musical chairs in terms of Congress and state Senate. Yuli New, an assembly member, has an announcement next week that may be a run for Congress. We don't know. It's really fun every 10 years when we see everybody just shift from one place to another.
Don't forget about former Mayor de Blasio, who...
We don't talk about him. We are at a time, though, unfortunately, but we will talk about Mayor de Blasio if he announces a run for Congress. Really fun. Josh Solomon from the Times-Union, Zach Williams from the New York Post. Thank you both so much.